Okay, hello there. I think, oh wait, I want to make sure this volume's. Hello. I want to see, I want to make sure this volume is off on this. There may be an echo. Okay, we're good. Um, Hi, I'm Jane Frizzell, and this is Basic Military Riding, basicmilitaryriding.com. Please go investigate it. And this summer to autumn semester, I have been going section by section, precept upon precept, through the preliminary doctrine and principles spelled out by Somer 1912 that became Fort Riley Cavalry School 1935, so that you guys will all have a sense of what was said before the riding starts. And as I said, it's a lot of doctrine and principle. Method will follow. And in keeping with their instructions, these dead, brilliant horsemen, they told us that methods may vary situation by situation, horse by horse, week by week, and we must be adjustable. But the method must always conform to doctrine and method that is vetted, that is established by principle, established by reason, and justified by experience. And those principles and doctrines, such as the doctrine of forward, or the principle of leg without hand, hand without leg. By the way, Boucher did not say that. That is Somer Cavalry School. Probably someone knows who said it, but it might have been 700 years ago. So it wasn't Boucher. I just wanted to make that clear. Anyway, that's what this series has been, and I'm considering putting these lectures on Udemy, where my other courses are, that are very necessary and helpful. Maybe even they're more practical than this. We've been really talking about ideas, the ideas behind training, and we're going to finish up this section, sort of this semester, with this section 25 called Limit of Training. And some of you may be sad because section 26 is the use of the curb bit and the snaffle. But, and I actually, why don't I just say now, everyone wants to know about the bit. There is a lot of stuff to know before you start handling reins and bits, and especially before you start introducing them to horses. Most armies of the world did reference Phyllis's 2 chapters. That's a public domain document. It's his, I think it's called Basic Training and Military Exercises, James Phyllis. And it's 2 chapters, the chapter on direct flexions and the chapter on lateral flexions. Direct flexions is pages 44 through 65 and lateral flexions 96 through 108. I would not go adventuring through the rest of his textbook. let your teacher take you through that, but I would go through these more simple Somer and Fort Riley textbooks first. Anyway, those two sections in Phyllis are public domain, and many of the armies of the world simply referenced people to those sections that Phyllis wrote instead of writing it out again themselves. It just says, see Phyllis. And that is good advice. There is an abbreviated version of Phyllis in this manual from Somer and Fort Riley, and it is section 41A and B. But I am telling you, Phyllis is better. I would, if you're really that interested, really read and study the Phyllis and really understand it. Really pay attention to his diagrams that show the right way and the wrong way, or else you'll go down a very bad path. Anyway, today we are going to be talking about the limit of training, section 25. That's the last section I'm really going to go into, because 26 I've already passed on. You need to do Phyllis. Forget about that. Well, I'm not talking to you about that here. And then the next section that is hugely important, like a huge hinge, a cornerstone, literally axis point you must dwell in, is section 27. But I did discuss that earlier in this semester. You know what? I think that we may continue on, but I think I'll pick it up in November. I think I'm going to take the rest of October off. All right. I'm going to do section 25 now, and then there's going to be a break. I'll start again the first Tuesday in November. And that's all I'm going to say about it. Section 25, limit of training. We already have sort of talked about this because we've been talking about horses' character, temperament, and physical makeup. Now, his physical makeup may mean that he doesn't have a lot of physical aptitude. And that may not be a bad thing. Sometimes there's horses that aren't the greatest athletes that are very useful and wonderful horses, because like the uber talent comes with other, usually when they're very talented, that's a lot of body parts and hinges to organize, and if they're really that athletically talented. And so it may take a very much more advanced trainer depending on the horse's level of talent. So, and then there's mental and intellectual talent that can often replace a lot of physical talent. If you have a good thinking horse, a good minded horse, that may be better than a freak of nature that can jump a house. So, those are all things to consider. And I want to say another thing about the physical makeup of a horse. Like, yes, there's a skeleton. Yes, how his muscles, the interplay of his muscles, but his nervous system is also part of his physical makeup. And I think that's something important to keep in mind. You know, is he touchy? Is he, you know, what kind of guy is he? And then, and so sometimes the line between temperament and the physicalness of the horse is a little blurry. You know, is this because of his temperament, or is there something physical? And so these are all things that you learn by experience. But do keep this in mind, what I said about that sometimes a horse that is not as apt physically might win. It might be a better horse. An example of that is Paul Revere. So this was a pretty important ride that they had planned, and he had to cross the harbor, I think. Is that right? Was it a harbor or a river? I think it was the harbor. He had to go across in the boat, so he had to borrow a horse. He wasn't riding his own horse. He and so they had to make a decision about which horse he would ride, Paul Revere's ride. And the decision was made that he rode a rather small, unimpressive mare. But they knew the mare had heart and was smart. And I think it was in Paul Revere's own memoir that he knew that he said the mare knew what was going on and participated. And I can't remember the source, but at one point she knew there were red coats somewhere and like, can't go that way, man, let's go. She figured out, and horses can do that. They definitely know what's going on. And I think that their ability to participate is very under recognized these days. Their intellectual ability and their heart really can be underestimated. And some of the worst perpetrators who are underestimating the aptitudes of horses the most are these behaviorists. And they think that they understand all this behavior, and they're all talking about like, oh, it pins its ears, this means this. Well, think past that a little bit. Think, I'm like a mare. I pin my ears when I'm pissed off, but that isn't the sum of my, they're very, I don't even want to say elementary in their assessments of the horse's intellect. I would say they're retarded. I would say they don't have the first clue about how smart these horses are. And the horses are playing them. I mean, that's what I think is going on. Anyway, in the second paragraph, it says the obvious. It's not possible to bring all horses to the same degree of perfection, but one should always endeavor to develop the full capabilities of each horse, but never with force. But we're talking about developing. We're talking about athletic and mental development. We develop attention, we develop concentration, we develop patience, and we develop stamina, endurance, and try. These are all attitudes and things that come out with the discipline, within the training, and develop more and more. And yeah, some horses are not going to the European Championships, but all horses can learn to carry themselves in the most efficient manner that their body can do, which means straight, and they can learn to displace their forehand and usually their haunches. And so what that means is a horse that travels forward by the book, straight by the book, on curved lines and straight lines, in all three gaits, can also back up and knows all the voice commands and all of the voice and the remaining natural aids, seat, leg, hand, for all that I just named. No one else. And since they can displace their forehand, I believe they can have at least a start of shoulder in. And since they can change the track of their haunches, they also can do travers. So, maybe the flying change is often the limit for many. But what if they had learned all of these things I just said before the flying change was ever attempted? Then maybe they could. So I do think that's really important, that we always endeavor to develop the full capabilities of each horse. But what that means is that each of us rider trainers, we must be developed as far along as we can in our education so that we know and can bring each horse to where they can be. Now, this is very politically correct how they state it here. There are some methods of training that aim to subdue finally and completely the horse's mental and physical forces, and thus obtain absolute domination over him. These are not based on, these methods are based on, they're not in the same domain as this logical system that has been established by reason and justified by experience. These are mashers and horse ruiners. And when a horse is dominated that way, they really aren't of good use. And it goes on to say that because they're not really going to make a good military horse either, because their instinct and initiative has been scrubbed. When the initiative has been scrubbed, when their try has been scrubbed by domination, I mean, obviously, that is a ruined horse or a damaged horse. And that is not any more a thinking horse or a participating horse. And I don't know people who do that. I've heard of people who do that. They need to be like marked, like with red paint, and called out publicly, in my opinion. But before going to point the finger, I think it's really important for people to understand that half developed riding, half trained riders, like maybe someone who's good on a horse and can stick on a horse and get it to do stuff. Many of those half-trained riders are some of the very worst perpetrators of sort of just stopping a horse from becoming what it can. There is forcing a horse to do something. It's easy for me to see. I don't know if it's easy for you to see, but it's just a useless thing to do, because we want the horse to do it again when we ask it again. There's got to be, submission is voluntary. Domination is not voluntary. But the system that I'm laying out here for you guys is a voluntary system. The horses volunteer it. They understand it. They want to do it. They become disciplined in themselves. They have self-carriage. You know, I think that's good. Let me just see if it says anything else important here. Yeah, a military horse or a great riding horse, there is a constant demand on that horse's own initiative. And I might point out also that the technical definition of forward riding, and this is the system I'm talking about, the forward riding system. The definition of forward is that the horse have his own desire, his own decision to advance the load. So that precludes domination. It's his own desire to carry. So we never scrub their initiative. I will see you in November.